Well, thank you everyone for coming. We had a lot of people interested in this webinar, even as far back as when we first solicited for different types of webinars to give. Ancillary materials and companion resources were definitely up there. Obviously, we would want to talk first about textbooks and authoring, which we did back in February and March. And then we talked about homework systems as well. That was last month's webinar. And we're rounding it out now with just the kind of catch-all of a lot of other resources. The title of this is very vague, and that's just because of how diverse of a library we are. So as was mentioned in the chat before we started, this is going to try to touch on a bunch of different ancillary materials and even talk a little bit about the verbiage of those along the way. My hope is to define what kinds of things we're considering ancillary materials and how to navigate the LibreTexts Commons with a couple new features that have rolled out this week. Um, I want to talk a little bit about projects and textbooks in the Conductor and Commons to just give an idea of how things are organized, how things are um, accessible or accessed in general, and then learn how to manage all those ancillary materials. And then finally, accessing and sharing ancillary materials outside of your own projects or your own personal use, and then where to go after that to get some more support. So, uh, I did a lot of looking around. These words are used quite interchangeably. Supplemental materials, um, ancillary materials, teaching resources, assets. But I kind of for this talk and what seems to be fairly common is ancillary materials are anything that encompasses anything that's available with a textbook for students or instructors, whereas um, ancillary materials are usually tied to a specific book. Supplemental materials may not always be tied to a book, so they could even include other textbooks that you may want to use, and they're usually geared more towards students. So, in other words, here's your book and also some supplemental materials that may help you learn the material, geared towards students, not always tied to a book. Whereas ancillary materials are anything for students or instructors that are more tied to a book itself. That's the verbiage I'm going to be using here. Some things that do fall into those categories: slide decks, study guides, practice problems, flashcards, supplemental readings, case studies, lab experiments for students, which those would fall under the supplemental materials window or umbrella. And for instructors, of course, they're going to have slide decks that may be different. So they might have more materials or the answers to problems on the slide decks or teaching exercises to do while the slides are going. So, and then also instructor manuals or guides, question banks, image banks for making your own presentations out of, or here's all the images from this book, lesson plans, answer keys, sample syllabi, for instance, if you're going to teach the class a different place. Sometimes it's nice to see examples of other syllabi that have used this course or this book in the past. And then maybe lab prep instructions for preparing those materials for the labs as well. Some other things that you might be really well useful for both would be learning objectives and summaries of materials, alignment with certification requirements if your class contributes to some sort of coursework that will get towards a certified degree or diploma. And then external resources, URLs that will link off to other places that may be useful, resources for the class in terms of databases or places to find data, or perhaps study guides that are published for other places. Assets themselves, especially when you start to talk about people who work with more databases and libraries, tend to be like the physical, or not the physical, but like the small little nodule items. So that would be the single URL that you would click, or a PDF, or an image. So some of those are going to be only for students. Some of them might be for students and instructors, and some of them might be for instructors only. So I just put a whole bunch of smattering. That's not an all-inclusive, but that would be materials that could be for either, or you want to have just mostly for students geared or more for instructors. And you might even have some assets that are primarily for authors and admins or librarians. So maybe report for a certain type of a structure, if it's a ZTC course, for instance, how you're going to catalog that, those sorts of things. So all these things can really kind of overlap. And you'll notice I put a bunch of PDFs in there because a lot of times what people are thinking about are some guide, a style guide, or some worksheet or something like that may be in like a finalized copy that you would like to have accessible for students or instructors. Within LibreTexts, there's really two places that I want to focus on putting as context or to surround your idea about assets. There's our commons, which is like the library of our books and our ancillary materials like laboratories and case studies, things that are authored. Those will all go into the commons, and those things can have assets connected to them, right? And if you want to build a book and then attach assets to it, and you want to control the assets themselves, that's done through our conductor, which is our project management system. So really, if you're going to be building and curating and maintaining them, that's the conductor. If you're disseminating, searching, or finding them, that's the commons. So here we're going to give you the quick overview of what our LibreTexts Commons looks like. You probably have seen it before. It's a book catalog basically, where you can search by author or institution that it's tied to, or subject area or what library it's in. And this is where all of our published books are located, whether they're for a specific school and course or if they're a generic bookshelf book. And then um, if you go and click on one of those books, you'll get the data for that book. At the top left corner, there'll be an image, a thumbnail, information about it, what library it's in, who's the authors, what are the licenses. You can also get the links to the conductor project there. You can submit an adoption report. So if you use that book in your class in any way, shape, or form, it's nice to submit an adoption report to let us know that you're using it. It helps us a lot for our grants and keeping us sustained as well. You could submit peer reviews to say what you liked about the book, what you didn't, feedback that you want to give to instructors. And then you can view those if you happen to be an owner of the book. And if there's homework associated with that book, you can view that on our Adapt. Those are all supplemental materials that can go along with it. And then ways to read it are down below in the blue. And that it was talked about a little bit more in the authoring one. You will also see a box on there that says assets. And those assets could be any of those things I talked about earlier. Anything that can be a file of any type can be uploaded, from Jupyter notebooks to files they would download and use in Excel to files that are data files, all the way to just slideshows and PowerPoints or images or videos or audio files. Anything can be an asset and they can put in there. And as you can see there, there's some files and there's also some folders, so you can have a folder structure for all the assets associated with that book as well. I think I might have seen a question pop up. I don't know, Jennifer, if you saw one.
I got it.
But cool, great. So I want to first highlight the Adapt one. If you didn't see it, our April webinar that was recorded and is posted online was last month in April. It's on Adapt. Adapt is a all-encompassing homework system that's very low cost, and it incorporates a lot of other open access or open educational materials from iMath, from MyOpenMath, WebWork, has mole view types molecule viewing structures. It has discussion-based threading, lots of generic homework systems, any types of homework and assessments. There are free question banks there. So if you're an instructor who's verified on LibreTexts, you have access to look at those question banks and look around, use those questions. Obviously, students don't have access to the full question bank for many reasons, but it is an open educational resource that is a critical and huge, massive supplemental material for books. But it's the one that we talked about a lot last month, so I'm not going to talk much about it there. But if you ever do go to our Commons, you can click on the homework tab, and you can actually see what types of homework assignments are already available or what courses have already been built surrounding these. And there's a bunch of things in there as well for different sorts of assignments. That does rely on a faculty member who writes a homework question bank to tie it to some sort of a book. But a lot of them are there, and you can take a look at those as one other place to use in the Commons. Another thing that you might not be aware of in our Commons is that we do have an Assets tab. And as of this week, we also have a search filter that you can see there on the right side of the screen that says available assets. So now you can filter by whether it has public assets or instructor assets. So if you were to click on there and select books that have certain assets, this is a search for books that have instructor assets. You can see there on the left-hand side a book that has 15 public assets and 2 instructor assets. And again, remember, assets is our generic term for just any sort of a file or item or URL or anything that is tied to a book. If we look a little closer at that book, Interpersonal Communication, that's the exact same view as the book that I showed you before. You notice that you saw the view on the bottom, which had the instructor manual with that little hat on top and then the PowerPoint presentations folder and a student manual at the bottom. If you are publicly logged in or publicly visiting our library and you are not logged in and you are not a verified instructor, you will only see the PowerPoint presentations for that book. If you are a verified instructor, which means you've gone through the verification process with our team, then you will log in and you will see those other assets that have that little hat on them. So student manual and instructor's manual don't appear unless you are an instructor. I believe this person probably doesn't want the student manual widely available, only for instructors to use. Maybe it needs to be modified in some way before it's publicly available, but they've chosen to restrict access to just instructors for that. And the reason why it does say 15 public assets, there's a bunch of PowerPoints inside of that folder, but you can't see that from this view, but you can click on the download on the right-hand side or open the folders and then download those there. Some file types, there's a whole bunch of file types. Basically, for the most part, they're not really restricted. So there are plain text files, there are image files, there's PowerPoint files, there's PDFs. If you have a Jupyter Notebook file that is a template that you want to use in your course, you can save that there so that other instructors can see an example of a template file that you would use. You can use code. Oh man, LaTeX files I've seen in there, Word documents, Excel documents, any sort of file that you would store in like a Google Drive, you can store in our asset manager. I don't want to say that 100% true. I think we're pretty unrestricted. Some dangerous file types might not be available. I don't know if we allow exe files. Um, but you can hold a whole bunch of those in the file type, and you can search for those once you're done. So if you wanted to search for PowerPoints, you can search for PowerPoints under that Assets tab. You could also search for by organization. So if you are a administrator who has a bunch of faculty working on your campus and they have books that are tied to your organization, if they're tied to that organization and they have assets, you can just put your university right there into the organizations filter, and you'll see all the assets that are available there, and what book they're tied to, by clicking on the details and which conductor project that they're available for. There's a lot of ways to find a lot of different assets, which leads us to how do you get them in there and how do you manage them? And so that brings us back to looking at the conductor for building and constructing. So if you haven't used our conductor before, we've talked about it essentially every webinar because it's kind of the central focal point of how you manage your materials and your authoring in LibreTexts. You manage your authoring teams, tasks, communications. The remixers available there. The peer reviews that I mentioned before there, our AI metadata co-author is there, and our alt text facilitator, which is also based on AI. That's also available there. All of these things are there. This is where you start a new book is by clicking on create a conductor project. You don't actually have to have a textbook in order to have a project. So you could make a project that's just assets. So if you just wanted to have a project out there that's just a bunch of assets that you're compiling together, you can create a conductor project. The next step would be to click on create a textbook. But if you don't want a textbook, you just want to have a project where you're building question bank things, or you're going to be building some sort of worksheets or something like that with collaborators, that can also be done here. And then they can be available through your through the Commons. This is also where you would find all those normal properties. So the source, your project, the notes for it, your team members, what level of access those team members have to your projects, whether they can read books or edit books, whether they can edit the list of team members, all those sorts of things are all done through the conductor. And down below in the conductor, there's also the assets area. So these assets here for that same book that I mentioned earlier, you can create folders, you can upload new files, you can create once you click on a folder, you can upload files into there. And if you click on that access there, where it says verified instructor, for instance, if you click on that, you can change what access is allowed, whether it's for verified instructors only or for it's public. And it says even they're visible on Commons so that you're not confused. The other access level that you can have is for team members only. So you can also manage assets that are only available to your authoring team or to people who have access to your conductor project. So the levels would be the authoring team, administrative team, all verified instructors, or publicly available for anybody who accesses this on the Commons. In addition to all of those, I wanted to bring this up just in case you had a textbook page that you've written. At the very bottom of every textbook page in LibreTexts in the library, there is also a place to upload attachments to that page. This is usually used if you had some file that was only relevant to the context of that specific textbook page. We don't encourage it but there are cases where it might be useful. Um, and for instance, this is actually, if you put an image into a textbook page, that image will show up down below in the attachments once you put it there. If you have an audio file, when you put it into that page, it'll get attached at the bottom of that page. So there are assets that are page specific. Those are not publicly available in our directory. The goal there is really that they're supposed to be just tied to the content within the context of that page. So you would find the book, you'd find the page, and then the assets might be available there. So these ones are not considered the assets that would be listed on the Commons page there. So kind of to go over all of this in a bigger context, the supplemental materials that you can keep on LibreTexts is very vast and it's really quite unrestricted. But we also have a lot of tools for building supplemental materials as well. Today's webinar is for the Academy, and we are launching Academy Online, which is training materials, and it includes a student training material as well. I know many people have been asking us for how do I get my students to learn how to use LibreTexts? There will be a training module on there that you can include in your classes moving forward. That's just about a week from being released, so check your emails and the newsletter for next week. We have an adapt homework system. Adapt homework system allows all those other problem sets that I mentioned earlier. They also allow you to build formative questions, so ungraded questions that you can embed in your book, or making a formative assignment to use possibly as like a in-class clickerish type question, where you can have students interact with questions, get feedback, get supplemental help without grades associated with it. And of course, you can also have graded homework in there as well. We also have launched the LibreText Forge, which is a writing um, platform. You think of it as a Google Doc that can help you to track your students' work and focus on the process of writing as opposed to just looking at the final product. So this is great for long form writing over weeks or a month, or lab reports, things like that that require multiple editing sessions. So you can kind of focus on building those skills for the process of going through a project rather than just completing it. And this is kind of our answer to uh, generative AI, essentially, to be able to focus more on the uh, process that students are undergoing and giving feedback on their processes. We also have the Jupyter Notebook, where you have the ability to have notebooks for coding, large data sets, R, Python, those sorts of coding languages. So if large data sets or data analysis or coding is in your courses, we have those that you're available to build those materials for your students or have them work on them collaboratively. The conductor I mentioned before, that's where our files are. So if you have files you want students or other instructors to be able to use, you put them into the conductor, they'll show up in the Commons. And lastly, we do have an H5P Studio where you can upload H5P materials or create new ones, edit new ones, modify them, and either use them embedded into your book just as part of your interactivity of your book, embed them into homework assignments as graded assets in the homework, or just include links to them if you just have them as something that you use in a class or something like that. So all those are tools that we have available for you that are all integrated into our system. There's a lot of things that are there. And part of the reason we have struggled in the past to say, what assets do we have? Well, we have a ton, and we have a ton of ways to build them, and we have a ton of ways to manage them. And we're working with a lot of people right now to make that more accessible for everybody. Part of getting this word out there and sharing it with people is these free monthly webinars. This was number 5. And we're actually on the plan to do around 6 of these and then start over again. So if you've got faculty who missed these and would like to participate them next half the year, we're going to repeat a lot of these over again and then highlight new materials and new things that have happened in the last 6 months. We also have our LibreFest this summer. You probably got on our email list. If you're not, make sure you register. If you're registered for LibreText, you'll get the newsletter, and there'll be information about LibreFest, which is coming up in July, a long form webinar and workshop online. And then we have Oktoberfest, which is a 1-day crash course that we do in October on LibreText and getting started while you're thinking about things. We have a lot of more paid options as well. The asynchronous training modules are being announced next week. We have cohort training, where you can get a group of people together, a group of faculty to rebuild a textbook, work on homework assignments, build up question banks. And then we have a lot of people that we work with for professional development, grant writing, or dissemination practices, marketing materials, things like that. So feel free to reach out as well. And I know that was kind of like a really, really large crash course, but I figured we'd have a number of questions. And at this point, I'd like to ask you all to let me know what you want to talk about.